Stop whatever you're doing right now, because what just happened inside the walls of the United States Supreme Court is going to change the way this country operates, maybe permanently. This isn't political noise. This isn't Twitter drama. This is a constitutional earthquake that every single American, whether you're a business owner, a factory worker, a student, or just someone who buys groceries, needs to understand right now. On February 20th, 2026, the Supreme Court of the United States handed down a 6-3 decision, declaring that the tariffs President Trump imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as IEEPA, are flatly unlawful. Let that sink in. The highest court in the land just looked at one of the boldest, most sweeping economic maneuvers in modern presidential history and said, "You don't have the power to do this." Full stop. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts anchored the ruling in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which vests in Congress alone the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. The court recognized that tariff power is, in its own words, very clearly a branch of the taxing power, and the framers intentionally denied the executive any part of that authority. Think about what that means. The Founding Fathers, more than 2 centuries ago, specifically built a wall between the president and the power to tax trade, and in one sweeping executive action, the administration tried to tear that wall down, and the Supreme Court just rebuilt it, brick by brick. Chief Justice Roberts wrote in his majority opinion that the president was asserting the extraordinary power to unilaterally impose tariffs of unlimited amount, duration, and scope, and that in light of the breadth, history, and constitutional context of that asserted authority, he must identify clear congressional authorization to exercise it. He couldn't. The administration couldn't point to a single line of law that gave the president that kind of unchecked economic power. And so the court struck it down. Now here's where it gets complicated, and where the real legal turmoil begins. Even though the court's majority opinion vindicates the plaintiffs substantively, there remains serious ambiguity over whether U.S. Customs and Border Protection will actually stop collecting the IEEPA tariffs before the lower court of international trade reconsiders its position. And it is also deeply uncertain whether CBP will issue tariff refunds to importers who have not filed their own lawsuits. In other words, the Supreme Court said these tariffs are illegal, but nobody is entirely sure when the government stops collecting them, or whether American businesses that already paid billions get any of that money back. The court did not say what should happen to the more than $130 billion in tariffs that have already been collected. $130 billion. Gone. And the legal system has no clean answer for what comes next. That money was pulled from importers, manufacturers, and ultimately consumers. It changed supply chains, raised prices, and reshaped global trade relationships. And now the authority behind all of it has been declared unconstitutional. The downstream chaos from that reality will take years, possibly decades, to fully untangle. The court's decision leaves no room for the continued imposition of IEEPA tariffs on goods from Brazil, linked to the Brazilian election results. However, the ruling has no impact on existing tariffs imposed under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, or the tariffs imposed under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, including the tariffs on steel, aluminum, copper, automobiles, auto parts, lumber, timber, semiconductors, and heavy-duty trucks. So this isn't a total rollback of every trade barrier. The architecture of American trade policy is not being demolished overnight. But the emergency powers framework, the idea that a president can wake up, declare a national emergency, and unilaterally reshape global commerce, that just got taken off the table. And the coalition that made this ruling happen? That's the part that should make everybody pay attention. Chief Justice Roberts delivered the 6-3 majority opinion, joined in full by Justices Gorsuch and Barrett, and joined in part by Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh dissented, arguing that IEEPA does authorize tariffs. This wasn't a clean ideological split. This was conservatives joining with liberals in a rare alignment to tell a Republican president that he went too far. Gorsuch and Barrett, both Trump appointees, sided against the administration. That alone tells you everything. When a president's own Supreme Court picks vote to limit his power, the legal case against that power is overwhelming. But now zoom out, because this ruling didn't happen in isolation. The Trump administration has faced hundreds of lawsuits and adverse rulings in the lower courts and has brought approximately 30 emergency applications to the Supreme Court, securing victories roughly 80% of the time. 80%. The administration has been extraordinarily aggressive in using the Supreme Court's emergency docket, sometimes called the shadow docket, to bypass the slow, methodical process of traditional litigation and get fast rulings at the highest level. These emergency requests allow the government to bypass the lengthy court process involving extensive briefings and oral arguments to seek immediate relief in the face of restraining orders and injunctions in lower courts. That shadow docket itself has become a flashpoint. Justices Ketanji Brown Jackson and Brett Kavanaugh had a rare, candid public exchange over the court's approach to its emergency docket. Justice Jackson signaled that the High Court's willingness to frequently side with President Trump on the emergency docket was a problem. Think about that. A sitting Supreme Court justice is publicly raising alarms about the way emergency law is being used. Not behind closed doors, not in a legal filing, but in a candid public forum. The court is having an internal identity crisis about its own processes, and that tension is now visible to everyone. And while the tariff ruling dominates the headlines, the broader legal landscape is equally volcanic. The Supreme Court previously denied the federal government's request for a stay in a 6-3 decision in December 2025, with Justices Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch dissenting. These emergency rulings are stacking up. The court is being asked, over and over again, to serve as the final referee in a constitutional standoff between the executive branch and the rest of the legal system. What does all of this mean for you? It means that the prices you pay for imported goods, the stability of the businesses that employ you, and the constitutional limits of executive power are all actively being litigated in real time. It means that the government collected over $130 billion under a legal framework the Supreme Court just called invalid, and nobody has a clean plan for what happens to that money. It means the relationship between the presidency and Congress over who controls trade policy is being fundamentally redrawn. The ruling in Learning Resources versus Trump will be studied in law schools for generations. But right now, in the immediate aftermath, the country is sitting in legal limbo. Businesses are waiting to see if refunds come. Trading partners are recalculating their strategies. Congress is being put on notice that the tariff power belongs to them, not the Oval Office. And the administration must now decide whether to comply, challenge, or creatively route around a Supreme Court ruling that dismantled the legal foundation of its entire trade agenda.